All right, it's time for another set of coaching rankings today, the Big 12. And I've done the other three, I guess, Power 4 conferences, whatever we're calling it now. But I've done the SEC coaches, the ACC coaches, and the Big 10 coaches. So you can click back a video or two or three or whatever it is if you want to check those coaching rankings out. But today we're going to do the Big 12. I'm going to do it the same way I've done the other ones. I'm going to give you kind of a tier list. These are the best coaches, and then these are slightly below that, and then these are kind of average coaches, and these are kind of bad, and these are really bad, whatever. I kind of put them into tiers, which is a lot easier to do, honestly, than just ranking them, in this case, 1 through 16, because we've got 16 teams in the Big 12 now with the addition of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and Arizona State, and the departure of Texas and Oklahoma. That's easier to do than it is actually ranking them, but you guys love it when I actually rank them, and you get mad when I actually don't rank them and just kind of chicken out and do the tiers. So we'll do the tier list first, and then I'll rank them for you in order from 1 to 16. Before you watch the rest of the video, comment down below. Will Deion Sanders be dead last? Or will he be next to last? I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, it is time to rank the Big 12 coaches. Tier list first. Here we go. This is pretty easy at the top. For me, it's Kyle Whittingham, and I honestly don't think there's anybody else right now in the Big 12 that's anywhere close to that. So I've got Kyle Whittingham in a tier all by himself. Of course, I've got my copious notes here, and I've got more notes actually typed up on the computer here. Upped my game from handwritten. I can't get away from the handwritten. I'm 45 years old. I'm old school. I still like to handwrite things down. Hell, I still use a handwritten day planner to plan my day out. Now, that's a whole other issue because I've got all sorts of weird mental conditions that I have to have a friggin'... Anyway, we're getting off track here. I'm a severely messed up individual. But anyway, I'm trying to move forward here with whatever. I've got some computer notes. None of that. I don't know what I'm talking about here. Let's start with Kyle Whittingham. To me, he's at the top of the list when it comes to the Big 12, and I don't particularly think it's close, and that's why I have him in a tier all by himself here. First of all, he's been there a long time. He has maintained a certain level of his success pretty much his entire tenure at Utah, going all the way back to before they were even a Power 5 team. They were what we called Group of 5, and they moved into the Pac-12. Of course, now they're in the Big 12. Now, last year was not a great year for Kyle Whittingham and Utah. Now, there's some reasons you can point to for that. Obviously, the injuries, most notably to the quarterback that kept Cam Rising out for the entire year. But that's kind of the point. They went 8-5. And that's a down year. I mean, for Utah, this is one of the most consistently good programs in the country. That's their worst season they've had since 2017. It was 8-5. So they're pretty good year in and year out. They were 7-6 in 2017, 8-5 last year. That's their 2 worst years they've had in the last 6 or 7 years. But one of the most consistent programs in the nation. They finished in the top 25 8 times. He's got 2 Pac-12 championships in the last 3 years. Clearly the cream of the crop in the Pac-12 over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, Oregon and Washington were both really, really good last year. Southern Cal was pretty good the year before that, but 2 out of the 3, they won the Pac-12 2 of the last 3 years that the Pac-12 existed. This will be his 20th season coming up here at Utah. What he's been able to do with the coaching staff is unbelievable. He's had the same 2 coordinators for, I think, 9 years straight. And you guys just think about whatever team you're a fan of and how often you're changing coordinators, either because they move on to better positions or maybe they're not good enough and you have to fire them and go get a different direction. Utah's been a consistently good team for a decade, and they've managed to hang on to the same 2 coordinators. They're moving into the Big 12, and they are the betting favorite right now, the odds-on favorite to win the Big 12 in their first year there. To me, it's pretty obvious. Kyle Whittingham in a tier by himself. Now, in the second tier, we've got a lot of really good coaches here, I think. Well, good to really good. We can debate how good or really good some of them are, but in no particular order in the second tier. And again, I will rank them 1 through 16 after we go through the tiers. But in the second tier, I've got Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, another guy that's been there for a long, long time. He's had some really good years. He's had some down years. Talk more about him in a second. I've got Lance Leopold in the second tier. He's a younger head coach, only been at Kansas for a few years, but the turnaround there has been unbelievable. We'll go over more of that in a second, too. Chris Kleiman at Kansas State, another guy, hasn't been there a long time, has a lot of success at his previous stop, and has been a consistently good team at Kansas State in the Big 12. And then Gus Malzahn, I decided to put in this second tier too. And I kind of went back and forth on Gus Malzahn. He had some good years at Auburn. We all kind of remember the troubles he gave Nick Saban. Nobody has beat Nick Saban more than Gus Malzahn. But he never really got Auburn where they wanted to go. And now we can debate whether or not Auburn ever should have fired him a few years ago. That's been debated ad nauseum. At this point, Auburn has been in a sort of a downhill free fall ever since they let him go. And it was not a great year last year at Central Florida for UCF, but that was UCF's first year in a Power 5 conference as a member of the Big 12. But I think if you look at Gus Malzahn's tenure as a whole, I think he belongs in the second tier there. Now let's go back to Mike Gundy. Now they were 7-6 in 2022. 2 years ago, not a great year. Mike Gundy. The knock on Mike Gundy is what? Well, he wins 8 or 9 games, but he can't win more than that. So 7-6, a down year for Mike Gundy 2 years ago. And then last year they started pretty bad, 2-2. And there was a lot of people, myself included, that were wondering, is Gundy looking to get out of Oklahoma State? When Auburn fired Malzahn and when they fired Brian Harsin, I wondered out loud on this channel, on video and live streams multiple times, if Auburn maybe would look at Gundy. But anyway, they started out 2-2 last year, and then they got it turned around. They had a great finish to the season. I think they ended up finishing in the top 25. Did they win 10 games? I think they were 10-3. So it was a terrible end to the 2022 season, and that sort of started some questions about Gundy. And then it was a terrible start to the 2023 season. But then they turned it around and ended up finishing 10-3. Another double-digit win season for Mike Van Gundy. He's had 8 double-digit win seasons in his time at Oklahoma State. He's been there. Has he been there 18 years? He's made a bowl game, I believe, 18 years in a row. He may have been there a little bit longer than that. But Mike Gundy reminds me of like Kyle Whittingham at Utah, Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, right? Two guys who've never won a national title, but pretty good programs over their time there. They've been there a long, long time. You kind of know what you're getting from both of those coaches. I don't think Gundy is on the level of Kyle Whittingham, but I think it's a fair comparison to make between the two. You're talking about two coaches who have both been at the same school for a long, long time and have been a pretty consistently good program. I've got Gundy and Oklahoma State in that second tier. Lance Leopold at Kansas. Now, for my money, if you want me to pick one coach in the Big 12 who I think is potentially on the verge of superstardom, it would be Lance Leopold. Now, I don't think that will happen at Kansas. I think Kansas has a glass ceiling. They're never going to be able to recruit. They don't have the resources. They don't pour the money in there to their basketball, to their football program like some of the other powerhouse schools do. I think Lance Leopold is a prime candidate to get plucked out of the Big 12 sometime in the next couple of years. What he has done at Kansas is unbelievable. And I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. He's basically a miracle worker. He built a dynasty at Wisconsin Whitewater. He won 6 Division III national championships. He then went on to win a pair of MAC division titles at Buffalo. But what he's done at Kansas really takes the cake. Kansas, it's hard to remember how bad Kansas was before he got there sometimes. But they were 0-9 in the season before he got there. They were 9-60 in the 6 seasons combined before he got there. In his first year there, he beat Texas. Now you're going to say, well, those are the years where Texas was shit in the bed. Yeah, but it's Texas. The talent discrepancy cannot be exaggerated there. I know that was sort of the stepping stone period of time for Texas and Sarkisian and all that kind of thing. But for him to beat Texas in his first year there was unbelievable. He's snapped Kansas's bowl drought. Last season, they went 9-4, and that was despite having to play multiple quarterbacks over the course of the season because of injury. He's got an innovative offense. He's a hot name in the world of college football. He reminds me a little bit of Matt Campbell 3 or 4 years ago. Matt Campbell decided to stay at Iowa State, and now the shine has wore off of that. We'll talk more about Matt Campbell in a second. But 3 or 4 years ago, Matt Campbell would have been in this second year. And he decided he had a lot of offers. He could have gone a lot of other places. And for whatever reason, for good or for bad, he decided to stay at Iowa State. And you can sort of see now his name gets mentioned a lot less often than it used to. I'm curious with Lance Leopold how committed he is to Kansas in the long run. If he gets some offers to what most people would consider to be better football programs, say the SEC or the Big Ten, something like that, I'm curious to see if he hangs on to that Kansas job or if he decides to take the leap. But what he's done there is unbelievable. And for my money, coaches in the Big 12, like if I'm buying a stock, I'm buying Lance Leopold. I'm buying Lance Leopold stock. Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. He's had a good run at Kansas State. I really like him. He won some FCS national championships at North Dakota State prior to that. He's already got a Big 12 championship and another 9-4 season in his short time at Kansas State. I like the sort of style of football that they play. It's not sort of what we think of when we think of Big 12 in our mind. And honestly, the Big 12 as a whole is not really what we think of it being. 3-4 years ago, it was kind of a track meet league. You think of some of those Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma teams and all the games they won 50-40 and stuff like that. There's still some of that in the Big 12, but it's not so much of that as it used to be. And Kansas State is sort of a great example of that. But they play a tough, physical kind of football. They've won at least 8 games in 4 of their last 5 seasons under Chris Kleiman. Like Lance Leopold, he's another name I think that's worth keeping an eye on in terms of future positions opening up at what we would consider to be better or bigger college football programs. But that's the second tier: Gundy, Leopold, Chris Kleiman, and Gus Malzahn. Moving on to the third tier, I've got Sonny Dykes at TCU, Willie Fritz at Houston, Matt Campbell at Iowa State, and Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Now, Joey McGuire and Sonny Dykes, in my mind, are probably the best 2 of those 4, and I think potentially could move up, into a higher tier on this list in a year or 2 down the road. They're going to have to put some good seasons together. Now, TCU had a really good season a couple of years ago. They lost the Big 12 title game after going 12-0 in the regular season, but made the playoffs, beat Michigan before losing to Georgia in the national title game. But last year, it was kind of a nosedive. They started off the season with an embarrassing loss to Colorado, and that was kind of it for TCU. Nobody really paid attention to them. Nobody really paid attention to them after that. I think TCU is the type of program that can be consistently good in the Big 12. And I think Sonny Dykes is the type of coach that can make them be good consistently in the Big 12. But they were 5-7 last year. They didn't even make a bowl game after he won National Coach of the Year the year before that. So which season is the outlier? Is the national title season? Not winning the national title, but making the national title game. Is that the outlier season for TCU and Sonny Dykes? Or is last year's 5-7 season the outlier for TCU and Sonny Dykes? Honestly, I think both seasons are probably outliers. I wouldn't put any money on TCU making another national title game anytime soon. I don't know that I'd put any money on TCU going 5-7 again anytime soon. They seem like a 7, 8, 9 win team under Sonny Dykes, and in a pop year, potential to win 10. And because we have a 12-team playoff now, I could see a scenario where at some point down the road, TCU does make a 12-team playoff with Sonny Dykes. Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Again, to me, the shine has wore off of this guy. He had a couple of really good seasons 3 or 4 years ago. His name was batted around for jobs all over the country. He decided to stay at Iowa State, and it's been kind of downhill. It's been kind of downhill since then. Coming off of a 4-8 season, Iowa State had the gambling scandal hit them at the beginning of last season. They ended up going 7-6. They had to play a freshman quarterback because the assumed starting quarterback was caught up in that gambling scandal. It was kind of a bad year for Iowa State all the way around, both the play on the field and the headlines surrounding Ohio State. A pretty negative year there for Matt Campbell and Iowa State. Who else is left on here? Willie Fritz and Joey McIntyre. Joey McIntyre at Texas Tech is a guy that I'm still really, really high on. He coached high school football for a long time, kind of a legend in the Texas high school coaching circuit there. And I still think he's going to end up being one of the best recruiters in the Big 12, particularly within the state of Texas, because of all the connections he has there to the high schools, the players, and the high school coaches. But he's 14-11 in his first 2 seasons with Texas Tech, and there's no way to describe last year other than being a disappointment. Now, I was higher than most on Texas Tech, so obviously I was just wrong about Texas Tech last year. But everybody that had predictions out on Texas Tech had them doing better than what they ended up actually doing. So it was a disappointing second season for McGuire last year at Texas Tech. He's going to have to get it turned around. Right now, he's got the exact same record Mike Leach had with Texas Tech to start his tenure there. So we all know what ended up happening with Mike Leach there. We'll see if he can get Texas Tech to that level. But I do like Joey McGuire. Again, a young coach, only been there a couple of years, who I think has potential to get a lot higher on this list. And then I think, was it Willie Fritz was the last one on this list? Yeah, you might not even know who that is, honestly, but he's the head coach of Houston. And of course, they just made their way into the Big 12 last season. That was their first year in a Power 5 conference. And this is Willie Fritz's first year at Houston. So this will be Houston's second year in the Big 12. Willie Fritz, first year at Houston. He comes over from Tulane. Tulane had two really, really good years the last 2 years with him as the head coach, right? They beat Southern Cal in a New Year's Six game a couple of years ago. They won 23 games total over the last 2 seasons, and he now gets an opportunity in the Power 5 at Houston. Again, sort of an up-and-coming coach, somebody to keep an eye on. We'll see what sort of success he can have in the Power 5, but you can't deny what he's done there at Tulane. Now, the next tier is interesting to me. Neal Brown and Dave Aranda. If I would have made this tier list last year, Neal Brown would have been a tier lower, like a tier worse, and Dave Aranda would have been a tier higher or a tier better. So I decided to just make a separate tier and put both of them in it. Neal Brown, one of the most surprising coaching jobs in the country last year to me was what Neal Brown did at West Virginia. I'm still not convinced he's a great coach. He has been bad at West Virginia, really bad, except for last year. They were projected to win, I think, 3 games last season, and they won, I believe, 8. So a really good job there last year. But again, can he keep it going? Is it going to be a 1-year pop thing and then they're not any good again? I don't know. They could be in a situation where winning 8 games last year was the worst thing that could have happened to them, because they were set to fire Neal Brown. Last year was going to be his last year. If they had another disappointing 5-6 win season, something like that, they were going to get rid of him. They were going to shove him out the door. They were going to bring somebody else in. He ends up winning the 8 games, and now they're stuck in a position where they can't fire him. They got to keep him. Now, if he keeps this positive momentum going, then that's great. But I'm not convinced that could happen. I still like Dave Aranda better as a coach than Neal Brown. You'll see that when I put the rankings up. But the opposite is true for Dave Aranda. He had a couple of good years at Baylor, and then it's been kind of downhill since then. Where's my notes on where's the notes on Dave Aranda? Here we go. He's got to win this year. It's so funny. Neal Brown and Dave Aranda have almost completely changed places from this time last year. There was a lot of people, myself included, that were hyping Dave Aranda up for a couple of years and sort of throwing Neal Brown out the window. Now you look this year, and Dave Aranda's under all the pressure to win. Could find himself on the hot seat. But this will be his 5th season with Baylor. And other than that year in 2021 when he went 12-2, and did he win the conference title that? Yeah, he won the conference title that year in 2021 at 12-2. Other than that, it has not been good, like at all. Outside of that one season, he's 11-23 as a head coach at Baylor. I mean, that's not just, it's not that that's not good enough. That's just downright bad. 11-23. I mean, that's like Billy Napier type territory. I mean, this guy, he's got to get it together this year, or Baylor may look to go in a different direction. And again, it's going to be a scenario where I'm going to have to come on here and tell you I was wrong, because I was very high on Dave Aranda. In fact, when Florida hired Billy Napier, I thought they should have hired Dave Aranda. And now this guy can't win a game to save his life. Again, outside of that sort of blip on the radar season in 2021 where he did go 12-2. And win the Big 12. The next to the last tier, I've got Kalani Sitake. I don't know if I'm saying that wrong or right, and honestly, I don't care because I'm not Mormon or Polynesian, even though he is. But he's the head coach at BYU, and they didn't have a good year either. Now, it was their first year in the Big 12, although they were technically considered a Power 5 team even before that. They were an independent. They were sort of considered in the same class as Notre Dame, like conferences who had scheduling rules. They would count BYU as a Power 5 game. Anyway, they were 5-7 in their first year last year. He's been there a while. I think he's been there 8 or 9 years. He went to school there, so it's sort of that's his alma mater. So you root for the guy, I guess. You want him to do good at the school he's from or whatever. But 5-7, obviously not getting it. Not getting it done. They had the 7th best class in the Big 12 this year in terms of recruiting. Recruiting is a weird issue to start with at BYU because they recruit so many Mormons. And this isn't a bash the Mormons thing, but they come out of high school and they can't play football right away. They have to do like a 1-year mission trip. I'm no expert on Mormonism, but there's something in there where, when they turn 18, they've got to go somewhere and for like a year and do a mission thing. So their freshmen are like 19 and 20. Their seniors are 22, 23, and 24. It's just, it's a sort of an odd situation there compared to a lot of other schools, but he's been there a long time. It hasn't really done anything of note. And 5-7 last year in the Big 12. I've got him here in this same tier with Scott Satterfield, who, look, it might be time to just face the music with Scott Satterfield that he's just not a good head coach. He keeps getting these opportunities and he keeps failing, miserable. He was no good at the last job he was at. Was it Louisville? I think was it Louisville? Now, Cincinnati, again, first year into the Power 5 last year after making the playoffs a couple of years before that with Luke Fickell, 3-9. 3-9. Now, look, the Big 12 was not some superpower conference last year. Yes, Texas was really good, but Oklahoma is still kind of rebuilding. Kansas and Kansas State have kind of asserted themselves as the third and fourth best programs there, at least last year. Look at a team like Cincinnati coming in there. This was bad. This was real bad, 3-9. Satterfield was at App State where he did really well, but then no good after that. 2 winning seasons in his last 6 years. It hasn't been good. This may end up being a failed hire here. I don't know how long this Scott Satterfield experiment's going to last at Cincinnati, but I'm not high on him at all. I've got him and Sataki in the next to the last tier. And then in the last tier of coaches in the Big 12, I've got Britt Brennan, Deion Sanders, and Kenny Dillingham. This is Arizona, Colorado, and Arizona State. So we'll start with Brent Brennan. He's the new guy at Arizona. He takes the place of Jedd Fisch. Hard to rank this guy, okay, because it's his first year on the job at Arizona, and he's kind of taking over an odd situation where the entire coaching staff left to take the job at Washington. They've got a really, really good quarterback. I mean, he's on some people's Heisman watch list. In fact, had Jedd Fisch stayed at Arizona, I think he would be top 10 Heisman or whatever. He's a really, really good Fatidia or whatever. And I can't pronounce a lot of these names. It is what it is. I don't name these people, so it's not on me. It's on them. But after going 3-22 in his first 2 seasons, Brennan took the program to a bowl game in 3 of the next 5 years before getting this job at Arizona. He was at San Jose State, who was terrible when he got there. He did kind of turn them around, not into some sort of juggernaut or superpower, but San Jose State was a lot better off when he left there than he was when he got there. And that's why he's gotten this opportunity now at Arizona. We'll see what he can do. Jedd Fisch had Arizona headed in the right direction. They beat Oklahoma in a bowl game last year, so we'll see. Again, this isn't so much an indictment on Brent Brennan saying I think he's a bad coach. It's just, San Jose State, hard to judge that. And now you move to Arizona, first year as a Power 5 head coach. Arizona's also moving into a brand new conference. So I'm going to have to give him a year, maybe even 2, see what sort of record he has. How does he recruit? How does he utilize the transfer portal? All of those sorts of things before we can more accurately judge him. And that's honestly why he's down here. And Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. Now he's in here because he's just a bad coach. This hasn't worked. I think he played at Arizona State too. This is another one of those things where you're trying to bring somebody back who played there. But he's terrible. This is another guy that's not going to be a coach for very long, at all. It seemed like a good hire at the time, I guess. It hasn't worked out. He's just been really, really bad. They were dead last in the Pac-12 in yards per play and scoring. Their offense was non-existent. They were 9th overall in the Big 12 when it comes to recruiting, so no positive signs to look for moving forward. They utilized the portal way too much, in my opinion. I think they signed 23 portal players already for this. It's just a mess there. Spoiler alert, he's the worst coach in the Big 12. It's not Deion. This guy's worse than Deion. I've got Deion in the same tier, though, here, this last tier. Deion's not a head coach. I don't know how many different ways to say it or how to say it or whatever. I don't know what Deion is. Motivational speaker. He's a team mom. I'm not real sure, but he's not a football coach. He's not out there coaching. That's not what he's doing. He's doing social media. He's doing interviews. He's coming in and giving pep talks. He shows up to team meetings wearing jogging pants and house shoes and, talks to the kids about how to be a good dad. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But you, as a football coach, you can bring in other people to do that. You're there to coach football, and that's not what he's doing. He pretends high school recruiting doesn't exist at all. I think they signed 4 high school players in this year's class. They're losing just as many players to the portal as they're getting. Starters, that Dylan Edwards is a huge loss for them. Deion's approach to college football is not going to work. It's just not. And it's not because he's doing it at Colorado. It wouldn't work anywhere. There's not a place in America where you could sign 4 high school kids a year and have a successful football program. Doesn't exist. I don't care what they do with the transfer portal. I don't care how many unlimited transfers they give students. You are never going to build a successful college football program signing 4 high school kids a year and rotating players in and out of the portal every single year. Their roster is turning over 40, 50 players a year combined portal between what they're bringing in and what they're losing. You may have a year where you strike gold in the portal at a couple of key positions, and you have some players that have phenomenal years, and you win 8 or 9 games. The following year, all of those players are going to be one and done people because you brought them in through the portal. So they've already played a couple of years somewhere else. You bring them in, they're gone to the NFL. You're starting over next year. If you don't strike gold again the next year, then you're back to winning 4 or 5 games. Now this year, they've got some star players returning in Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, who I think are legitimate superstars in the world of college football. These could potentially be 2 top 10 picks in next year's draft. I think Shedeur Sanders is one of the best 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the country. I think Travis Hunter is probably the best athlete playing football in the country. I think he's a much better defensive back than he is wide receiver. We all know he plays both sides of the field there in Colorado. If he gets picked in the top 10, I believe it'll be to play defensive back, not wide receiver. Not that he's not any good at wide receiver, but defensive backs are just coveted more. There's less elite DBs entering the draft every year than there is wide receivers. So I'm not knocking his skills or ability as a wide receiver. I just think he brings more value to an NFL team as a DB because it's so hard to find elite DBs. So they've got playmakers, 2 of them at least. That's just not enough. The offensive line is going to be bad again. The defensive line is going to be bad again. They're not going to be able to run the ball again. They're not going to be able to stop the run again. I think they'll win more games this year than they did last year because they're out of the Pac-12, which was one of the toughest conferences in the country last year, and they're into the Big 12, which is either the easiest or second easiest conference. It's them or the ACC. And I do think Shedeur, with a year of Power 5 experience, will play better, even better this year than he did last year. Same with Travis Hunter. They'll have wide receivers that put up numbers. But as a team, they're just not going to be a great team again. And it's Deion's fault. It's 100% Deion's fault. And that's why he's in the last tier on this list. All right. Now I'm going to rank them for you 1 through 16. I'm not going to talk a lot about the rankings because I feel like I've talked about every single coach on this list enough already. How long is this video already? 20 minutes, 25 minutes? All right, you already know Kyle Whittingham, number 1. There's no debate on that in my mind. He's clearly the best coach right now in the newly formed Big 12 or the new look Big 12. Number 2, this was tough. I've got Lance Leopold at Kansas, slightly ahead of Mike Gundy. And this was hard for me. I went back and forth on 2 and 3. I respect what Mike Gundy has done and the length of time that he has done it. It is impressive to me. However, what Lance Leopold has done at Kansas in the last 2 or 3 years, to me, is unbelievable. The fact that they went 9-4 last year, and I don't know why more people don't talk about it. It's probably the best coaching job in the country last year is what Lance Leopold did at Kansas. So I've got him 2, Gundy 3. I've got Chris Klieman 4 and Gus Malzahn 5. And again, I went back and forth. Should Malzahn be 4 and Klieman 5? Malzahn was bad last year. Klieman was just better last year, and that was sort of the tiebreaker for me. Malzahn had some good years at Auburn. Wasn't good enough, obviously, because Auburn fired him. Now he's at Central Florida. He's sort of steering them into their transition into the Power 5, and we'll see where he goes from here. I do think Gus Malzahn's a good coach with a pretty good offensive mind. The recruiting is improving there, but I've got Chris Klieman at Kansas State slightly ahead of Gus Malzahn right now. So that's 1 through 5. At number 6, I've got Matt Campbell at Iowa State. 6 and falling. If I'd have done this list 3 or 4 years ago, he would have been one of the top 4 coaches probably in the Big 12, right? He would have been ahead of Texas coach at the time. It hasn't been a good last couple of years for Matt Campbell. You throw the gambling scandal in on top of that, and it's just been a rough road there for Matt Campbell at Iowa State the last few years. But I've got him at 6 and falling fast. I do this list next year. If this year doesn't go good for Iowa State, if they're hovering around the 500 mark this year, he's going to drop drastically on this list. But I've got him at 6 right now because of what he's done in the past. Sonny Dykes, I've got at 7. This is pure potential here. I still like Sonny Dykes. You have to give the guy credit for what he did 2 years ago. I know last year was bad. Nobody can name a single player on TCU's team anymore. I get it. But you got to give the guy credit for what he did 2 years ago. An undefeated regular season, comes up short in the Big 12 title game. Everybody wrote him off in the playoffs. Oh, my God, worst playoff team ever. They got no business being there. They go out and beat Michigan, prove everybody wrong. Yeah, they got drubbed up and down the field by Georgia in what is now the second worst bowl loss in the history of college football postseason, which goes back 120 years. At the time the game was played, it was the worst loss in college football postseason history. But of course, Florida State, not to be outdone, showed up this past season and took a 60-point loss in the postseason, supplanting TCU as the worst postseason loss in college football postseason history, which again goes back over 120 years. The first Rose Bowl was played in 1902. So that's right. Georgia is the proud owner of the two biggest beatdowns in the history of college football postseason. But I've got Sonny Dykes at 7, and then at number 8, I've got Joey McGuire. Again, a guy I'm high on, but you got to prove it on the field. The fact that I like you as a coach and think you have a lot of potential is only going to take you so far. At some point, you actually got to win some games. Willie Fritz at Houston. Again, Houston has been a consistently good group of 5 team for a while. But they're not in the group of 5 anymore. They're in the Power 5. They're in the Big 12. They've got to take that next step. We'll see if Willie Fritz is the right fit there for Houston, if he can get that. If he can get that thing going. I put Dave Aranda ahead of Neal Brown. They each only have one good season, but the one good season that Dave Aranda had was better than the one good season that Neal Brown had, because Dave Aranda actually won the Big 12. I think he won over 10 games, whatever it was. Neal Brown, his unbelievable season was like 8 wins. So I've got Dave Aranda slightly ahead of Neal Brown. But again, two coaches headed in opposite directions, right? If I'd have done this last year, Neal Brown would have been much lower on this list, and Aranda would have been a little bit higher. But I've got Aranda at 10, Neal Brown at 11. At 12, I've got Kalani Sitake at BYU, been there a long time, has some good seasons, hasn't been consistently good, and last year was not good at all. But he's done more in his time at BYU, which is an extended period of time, than Scott Satterfield has done at Cincinnati. And again, I think he may end up being the worst coach in the Big 12 before it's all said and done. I'm still giving Satterfield some credit for what he did at whatever it was, App State. But he hasn't been good since then. At 14, I've got Brent Brennan. At 15, Deion Sanders. And 16, Kenny Dillingham, who could find himself out of a job after this season for sure. All right, there you go. The Big 12 coaches tier list and ranking list, 1 through 16. Again, I've done the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10 versions of this video already. So if you want to see my thoughts on the coaches from the other 3 power conferences, click back a couple of videos and you'll find them. I do appreciate you watching. Please hit the thumbs up if you hadn't already. Let me know in the comment section down below where I'm wrong. And have a good morning.